You see, what Lisa Montgomery did to her victim, Bobbie Jo Stinnett, was so horrendous that she became, in January 2021, the first woman to be federally executed for nearly 70 years. Bonnie Brown Heady, who kidnapped and murdered a 6-year-old boy and who got gassed to death, no less, back in 1953, having been, until January 2021, the last woman to suffer one such outcome. But given the lifetime of abuse that Montgomery herself had suffered, did she really deserve as much as the death penalty for her crimes? Lisa Montgomery was born on February the 27th, 1968 in Melvin, Kansas. Being one of 5 children, Montgomery had an alcoholic father who was given to physical violence and a vastly abusive mother who made it clear that Lisa and her siblings were unwanted. The family lived in poverty and their home was often described as chaotic and unstable. The you-know-what abuse that Montgomery suffered throughout most of her childhood began the moment her mother swapped out her children's father for a new man, this new man being the one to systematically perpetrate the said you-know-what abuse against Montgomery. I'd like you to know at this point that in order not to fall foul of YouTube's content policies, I have to disguise certain words. If, despite my word disguising, you've so far been enjoying this video, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready if you feel like it, and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. Following the example set by her father, Montgomery developed a drink problem before she reached her teens. Her mother's response to that was to threaten her daughter with a gun. She was happy enough, conversely, to have her daughter selling a particular service to gentlemen callers, the mother herself having instigated her daughter's you-know-what-itution. The mother, likewise, instigated her daughter's marriage, which came when her daughter was 18, the mother's massively fucked up mind leading her to join her daughter with none other than her stepbrother in holy matrimony. Whew. At some point before turning 36, the point when she also turned killer, Montgomery got into her second abusive marriage because, yes, her union with her stepbrother was, inevitably I'd say, the union from hell. Sorry, but I haven't been able to trace which of Montgomery's 4 children came from which husband of hers. Research shows that childhood abuse, particularly the you-know-what kind, can have long-lasting impacts on a person's mental health, leading to conditions like PTSD, dissociation and depression. At no point before reaching adulthood had Montgomery been able to access the mental health services that she desperately and obviously needed in order to address her deteriorating mental health. Instead, she was trapped in a cycle of abuse and neglect, including in the form of an ugly marriage that would follow her throughout her life. Bobbie Jo Stinnett was born on the 4th of December 1981 and graduated from Nodaway Holt High School in Graham, Missouri in 2000. Bobbie Jo and her husband ran a dog breeding business from their home in Skidmore, and in the spring of 2004, the young couple learned that they were expecting a child. Bobbie Jo and Montgomery met through the dog show events that they both attended and had ongoing interactions in an online chat room called Ratter Chatter that Bobbie Jo herself had set up for fellow lovers of rat terrier dogs. But of course, Bobbie Jo didn't know that her new friend was Lisa Montgomery, because Lisa Montgomery had presented herself to her new friend as Darlene Fisher. More importantly, in Ratter Chatter, Darlene Fisher told Bobbie Jo that she was pregnant as well, prompting, naturally, numerous conversations between the 2 women about their respective pregnancies. Now, while using both an assumed identity and an assumed address, Montgomery having told Bobbie Jo that she was from near Bobbie Jo's own hometown of Skidmore, and pretending to be pregnant with someone that you're getting to know are, without a doubt, 3 highly worrying behaviours. And God knows how Montgomery fooled Bobbie Jo into believing that she was pregnant. The 2 met up on a number of occasions during Montgomery's totally fake pregnancy, you see. Anyway, Bobbie Jo, of course, had no idea that this is what Montgomery was doing. She had no reason to be suspicious of her. But again, I can't answer how she came to believe that Montgomery was actually pregnant. She was pregnant herself, so she would have known how Montgomery was supposed to be looking. Did Montgomery stuff cushions under her jumper or something? Honestly, who knows? Bobbie Jo was being lured into a deadly trap by Montgomery, but very sadly had no way of knowing that. And talk about something being stranger than fucking fiction. On the 15th of December 2004, Bobbie Jo told her husband and her mother that a woman from Fairfax, because that's where Montgomery had told Bobbie Jo that she lived, was going to stop by the next day and look at the puppies that she and her husband were offering for sale. And sure enough, when Montgomery turned up the next day, she and Bobbie Jo hung out at Bobbie Jo's home for about 2 hours, playing with the said puppies and chatting. Shortly after Bobbie Jo received a call from her mother, Montgomery fished out the white cord that she had brought in her jacket, wrapped it round the neck of her 8-month pregnant friend who was unable to defend herself against her attacker, and strangled her until she passed out. Next, she retrieved the kitchen knife that she had also been carrying in her jacket and made an incision on Bobbie Jo's abdomen from hip to hip. When, straight after making this opening in Bobbie Jo's body, she strangled Bobbie Jo for a second time, which happened when, on being roused back to consciousness by the pain in her abdomen, Bobbie Jo tried to fight her off, Montgomery killed her. After swiftly collecting the fetus from Bobbie Jo's uterus, Montgomery took off back to Kansas. Bobbie Jo's mother, whose shock and devastation at finding her daughter in her home about an hour after Montgomery's flight we can only imagine, told emergency services that her daughter looked as if her, quote, stomach had exploded, unquote. Montgomery was arrested on December the 18th, just 2 days after her crime. Authorities quickly located her after tracking her movements, and she was taken into custody. During her interrogation, Montgomery's behaviour raised serious questions about her mental state. She was confused and disoriented, giving inconsistent statements and showing signs of psychosis. At trial, which took place in 2007, Montgomery was charged with a single count of murder. As at early 2025, Bobbie Jo's daughter, who, on the 16th of December 2004, 8 months into her gestation, was ripped out of her mother's womb shortly after her mother was strangled to death, is a young woman out in the world, having been raised by her father. Montgomery's defence team argued that their client was not legally responsible for her actions due to her severe mental illness. Experts testified that Montgomery was suffering from a combination of bipolar disorder, PTSD and schizophrenia. They argued that she wasn't in control of her actions and that her delusions and psychosis played a major role in the crime. In UK law, Montgomery would have had a strong case for the defence of diminished responsibility. This is our equivalent of the US defence of not guilty by reason of insanity. However, the prosecution argued that Montgomery had planned the crime and that it was, as such, a premeditated act. They painted her as a cold-blooded killer, emphasising the brutality of the murder and the fact that Montgomery had carefully carried out the crime. Despite the defence's arguments, the jury convicted Montgomery of capital murder and she was sentenced to death. Bobbie Jo's family themselves argued that what Montgomery did was just so horrific she should be sentenced to death no matter what mental disorder she had. Lisa Montgomery's case became a focal point in the debate over the death penalty, especially for individuals with severe mental illness. Her supporters, which included mental health professionals and legal experts, argued that the criminal justice system had failed her, both by not recognising during her trial the extent of her mental illness, and in fact a lot of people have slammed her defence lawyer because they felt that those defence lawyers didn't defend her sufficiently. They didn't make a big enough case of her mental disorders as qualities that rendered her not legally responsible for her action, not guilty by reason of insanity. People say that they could have done a much better job than they did, and the people who say that are lawyers themselves. And sorry, the other thing that the criminal justice system did that failed Montgomery was that they imposed the death penalty on her despite her psychological conditions. Celebrities, legal scholars and even former prosecutors spoke out on Montgomery's behalf, asking for mercy and pointing out that Montgomery had been a victim of abuse and mental illness for much of her life. I would say for fucking all her life. Come on, given what we know of her background, when was she ever not fucked up in the head completely innocently? Despite the widespread outcry, Lisa Montgomery was executed by lethal injection on January the 13th, 2021. And this came during the final days of that first Trump administration. She became the first woman to be executed by the federal government in nearly 70 years, as I mentioned at the beginning. Her execution was met with strong criticism, with many protesting exactly as they had done before. I feel sorry for everything that happened to Montgomery before the moment when she wrapped a piece of white cord around the neck of an innocent 8-month pregnant woman who thought she was her friend. I don't feel sorry for her for being put to death, but I agree with those who say that life imprisonment without the possibility of parole would have been an adequate punishment for her crimes. The people I do feel sorry for are, of course, Bobbi Jo Stinnett, her daughter, her husband and her mother. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.